All right, I want to thank everybody for coming out this morning. In a moment, we'll have Joanne McCall, FEA Vice President, make a few remarks. After that, we'll have Ron Meyer explain the action we took today. And we have a bunch of other people here as well. FEA Secretary Treasurer Clara Cook. We have Rabbi Merrill Shapiro, who represents Americans United for Separation of Church and State. We have Marilyn Wills with the the League of Women Voters, Florida League of Women Voters. Dale Landry with the Florida NAACP. John Mixon with the Florida Association of School Administrators, and who have I left out here? We have Cindy Gerhart with Florida PTA, and Ruth Melton, who is with the Florida School Boards Association. So thanks so much. We'll take a few, we'll have statements, take a few questions, and then you can address and talk to anybody here. Joanne?
Thanks, Mark. Good morning, and welcome to the FEA building. As many working women, I wear many hats, so I'm going to tell you my hats today. My hat, first and foremost, is a mom of a public school student here in Leon County. My second hat is that of the Vice President of the Florida Education Association, representing 140,000 members from Pensacola to Key West, representing public schools. And my third role today is that of the lead plaintiff of the lawsuit that we have filed this morning in the Leon County Circuit Court, of which Ron will talk about in detail. In 2006, we won a court case that said the voucher program was unconstitutional. It was clear. It was upheld and said that there were two very good reasons why it was unconstitutional. And since that time, the Florida legislature has continued to go down the path of making opportunity scholarships, voucher programs, whatever you'd like to call them, in spite of the fact that the court said it was unconstitutional. So we are now coming together to file this lawsuit with a coalition of folks on behalf of those of us in public schools to make sure that the lay of the land is upheld. The Florida legislature is not above the court. They are not above the Constitution. As a matter of fact, you can change the Constitution if you like. And as a matter of fact, they tried to do just that. And the Florida voters said, thanks, but no thanks. They like to keep the separation of public schools and state money, and the voucher program was not something they were interested in. So for us, we want to make sure that all students, and please hear me when I say that, we want to make sure that all students have a high quality public education and have access to that, no matter what their walk of life is, no matter what their capability is, no matter what their disability is. And public schools are the ones that provide that, and it is the paramount duty of the Florida legislature to make sure that they fund public schools adequately to make sure that all students can achieve the American dream. And so that's one of the premises that we're bringing forward. I'm going to let Ron talk in detail, but I also want us to remind everybody that voucher schools are not held to the same standards that public schools are. They are not accountable for the state's funding. They don't have to use the same standards. They don't have to use the same tests. And they certainly don't have to hire certified teachers. So how are we really sure that the state's money is being used wisely? And we will say this, apparently the story was leaked a little bit yesterday, and there was quite a bit of hoopla about that, and a lot of statements and wanting us to answer statements, and we said we'd wait till today. But I have to say, I'm a Sumter County girl. That's where I taught my entire career. And we have a saying in Sumter, and we say, a hit dog will holler. And I have to say, the amount of media that has been generated by the former speaker, the former president, the incoming speaker, the incoming president, and we have a litany of folks outside that want to show their demonstration for that. I just have to say, if we're sure that we're standing on good ground, I'm not sure what all the hoopla is about, but maybe, just maybe, we know that we've treaded on the Florida Constitution and it won't withhold the mustard. And then the last thing I'll say is my student is in school today. He is not here with me, he's in school. And that's where children should be today. They should be in school. Thank you. Ron?
Good morning. I'm Ron Meyer. I wanted to tell you a little bit about the lawsuit we filed this morning in the Leon County Circuit Court. First of all, let me list the parties for you. Joanne McCall, who you've just met, Senator Geraldine Thompson from the Orlando area, Bob Jones, who is a past president of the Florida Association of School Administrators. He could not be here, so John Mixon is here on his behalf for FASA. Rabbi Merrill Shapiro, who you did meet, is joined by Reverend Harry Parrott and Reverend Harold Brokus, who also participated in the Bush v. Holmes challenge to vouchers nearly or more than a decade ago. Institutional plaintiffs include the Florida Education Association, the Florida Congress of Parents and Teachers, who are represented here, the Florida Association of School Administrators, the Florida League of Women Voters, and the Florida State Conference of Branches of the NAACP. The defendants in the suit are the governor and cabinet, who sit as the agency head for the Department of Revenue, which is charged with doling out the dollars that this program provides, as well as Pam Stewart and the Florida Department of Education and the Department of Revenue. The complaint has two counts. One arises under Article 9, Section 1 of the Constitution, which, as I think most of you know, requires the state to provide quality education to all students within its borders in a system of free public schools. Just as the Bush v. Holmes court found, we are urging this court to find that this program, instead of meeting that constitutional mandate, diverts state revenues for the purpose of establishing an unregulated hodgepodge of schools that don't have to meet the standards and are not uniform as required by the state constitution. In Bush v. Holmes, the Supreme Court left undisturbed the en banc, meaning that all judges participated, decision of the First District Court of Appeal, which also found the Opportunity Scholarship Program to be unconstitutional because it violated Article 1, Section 3 of the Constitution. So our second claim in this lawsuit similarly raises the Article 1, Section 3 problem with these voucher programs, and that is that money from the state cannot directly or indirectly be used in support of any religious institutions, and we allege that that's what's happening here. So the case is filed. I'm sure that we will see a lot of interest in interveners, in amicus, in parties wanting to be heard. We welcome their participation. We feel that this voucher program is subject to the same deficiencies that the court found existed in the Opportunity Scholarship Program. The mechanism for siphoning state dollars to these private schools is a little different under this program, but it's nonetheless state money that's being used to pay for these schools. And state money that's being used as well. Keep in mind that 3% of the money comes off the top and goes to the Scholarship Funding Organization, which this year earned about $8 million of this money to do things, I guess, that include busing children to press conferences. So thank you very much. We'll entertain any questions, as will the plaintiffs.
Questions?
Yes, can you speak a little bit about why now?
Well, Ron, I
13 years this legislation has been on the books, and why the lawsuit now?
There comes a time when there's a tipping point that's reached. In the very beginning of this program, it was narrowly focused. It was relatively directed towards helping a few people who had problems in the public schools, apparently. And I think a lot of people turned a blind eye to the constitutional questions which were presented even as this program was rolled out. What has happened over the years is an exponential increase, not only in the amount of the money that's being given as vouchers, but also in the number of students and the socioeconomic levels that entitle people to these vouchers keeps going up. And what we see is the creation of a non-uniform system, a dual or parallel system, if you will, of education that we feel violates the Constitution. And I think the education stakeholder community, while it may have been willing to tolerate this kind of program as an experiment to see whether indeed children did better in these programs, which data doesn't seem to support, or not, the fact is this has become an industry. It's a moneymaker for scholarship funding organizations, and it's a program that we think is in dereliction of the constitutional requirement. So it reached a tipping point, and now's the time.
And so for us, if we're talking about our most precious resource, which are our children, then we should be wrapping our arms around all of the students. And if the schools that are struggling, we should be doing something about that and digging, rolling up our sleeves and doing what we need to do and providing the proper funding in order to make them successful too. Because this is not about having children flee. This is about making sure that we are giving everyone a great education so that they can achieve the American dream and become productive citizens of this state. Further questions?
So you explained the tipping point. I did want to ask, why couldn't it have been argued that the bill that was signed into law by then Governor Christ, who you all have subsequently endorsed, why wasn't that necessarily the tipping point? Because that was the one that took it and created the multiple year expansion where it can go up every year if it reaches 90% of the threshold. I mean, I'm trying to figure out if you know, in terms of an expansion, that was the really large expansion of the program.
There were those of us who believed back in 2001 when this program was initially rolled out, it ought to be wrapped into the Bush v. Holmes suit. The decision was made not to wrap it in because we thought the Bush v. Holmes suit would travel through the courts a lot quicker than it did. You'll recall that it took nearly 6 years from the date that suit was filed until the date the Supreme Court ruled. And in the meantime, all of these efforts to grow these alternative programs were underway. A fair argument could have been made that it should have been litigated back then, in the intervening years, or whenever. The point is, we've decided to make a decision today to bring this issue to the foreground and let the court decide. If it's constitutional, then it'll go on. If it's not, it will stop.
One follow-up question. Could someone, and I realize that Ms. Melton's here, and she's representing that group, but I was wondering if someone could comment on the fact that the people involved with the Step Up for Students have basically put out press statements in the last 2 days taking credit for defeating school board members who they said were backing this lawsuit.
Let me first of all explain that Dr. Wayne Blanton, the executive director, isn't here today, not because he didn't want to be here today, but because he had a health issue that he had to be out of town for. So Ms. Melton is here and she can discuss the question.
Excuse me. I think that perhaps the most compelling information about these school board races that Step Up for Students and others have taken credit for controlling is that during the course of the campaigns of both of those individuals, talking about Diane Smith in Volusia County and Karen Disney Brombeck in Indian River County, a debate about this voucher program never occurred. And so in taking credit for the results of that race, what it indicates is that outside interests came in at the last minute and were able to influence the outcome of that race. It was not a reflection of necessarily of the citizens of that community. So this is an instance in which outside interests that are very well funded and very politically powerful have been able to influence the outcome of an election that should have been controlled by the voters within the district. I think that that's fairly alarming.
Further questions?
So, maybe for Ron, there is that lawsuit in the Orlando area that gets at all voucher programs, as I understand it. You chose not to join that already in progress?
The lawsuit that you're referring to is one that's been filed, I believe it was initially begun in 2009 by the Southern Legal Council in Gainesville. It started out as a challenge to the inadequate funding that the state of Florida was providing in response to the Article 9 mandate that it be a paramount duty. More recently, the complaint was amended to allege a number of programs that the plaintiffs in that suit felt demonstrated that the state is squandering public money on corporate vouchers, other tax credit vouchers, other kinds of programs, as opposed to putting that money into the public education program. And so that suit is still really directed toward the adequacy of school funding, and we wish them well. It does have some issues surrounding vouchers, certainly. They don't go into the church-state issue, which is important to Rabbi Shapiro and the group he represents, and others as well. And so we felt that rather than joining into that suit or intervening, we thought we would bring a separate action that just deals with the Article 9 and Article 1 constitutional questions and proceed in that manner.
I don't, this is not so much a legal question, I guess it's a policy question, to address what I call the Copland argument of voucher proponents, as I believe it was Robert De Niro said to the Sylvester Stallone character, in Copland, I gave you a chance to be a cop and you blew it. The voucher proponents are saying, we gave you a chance to teach our kids and you blew it, and that's the only reason that voucher programs have come about in the last few decades. Is there anything to that argument?
Well, I would disagree with that argument. I think as you look across this state, we're educating students very well. There are schools that are struggling, and as I said, we should be wrapping our arms around those schools that are struggling and making sure that those schools are shored up with what they need. What the voucher program is doing is creating a parallel system, taking money from the public school system where that's not possible under that. One of the pieces that people talk about all the time is ESE students and the funding for ESE students. Let's talk about the funding for ESE students. This Florida legislature has cut funding for ESE students in the public schools by almost 14% in the last several years. So if we really want to make sure that we're educating all students, then let's provide the funding and do what we're supposed to, because that's their paramount job, is to fund public.
Another famous line, what your argument is that the system of education that's been created is separate and money.
Easily.
Dale Landry, I think, has a response he'd like to make.
Absolutely.
You know, one of the things from the NAACP perspective, and that's an interesting thought that you bring up, we need to go back and really look at this system, okay? One of the things from the NAACP, we feel very strongly, we have created, this public school system has been decimated. There was a time when the schools were open for 7 periods that lasted up to 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And we had other things that we could do to work with our children, but we cut that back and made it a machine. That we open schools now at 9 something in the morning, they're out at 2:30. We've set them up to fail. The public school systems have been set up to fail, and that failure for us is very instrumental, because we're finding more kids are going into the system. When we reduce the dollars in the school, we put money over there to build prisons. Let's go back and look at the game. We can judge on how many prisons we need to build based on 4th grade. We built a system that's set up to take our children and destroy them. I think it's time that we need to stop and admit that that system has failed. We need to go back and reinvest in our public school system. The NAACP, I was just talking with the state president. I'm proud to be able to represent the Florida State Conference for Adora Obenweezy, who is an educator. And her issue is this: we need to go to 12-month schools, public schools. We need to open the schools back up. I don't know about any of you. Are any of you working in schools, have gone to the public school system and seen what's happening with our children when they get out of school at 2:30 and they go back into a neighborhood that no parents, nobody's there at 5 o'clock other than gangs? And they're preying on our children? The school system, it was set for failure so this other system could be set into place. And it's all about money. And we are extremely angry, we're extremely upset, and we are joining back in. And we've been on board in this fight from the beginning. We're going to be on board with this fight to the end because we've got to save, and it's not just black children. We've got to save all our children. And that's what's happening, folk. They're being destroyed. We've got to put our money back, and that's an investment into our future. We need to invest back into our schools, open our schools back up, and then fund them. But as they're set right now, you're absolutely correct. They're going to fail, and they're going to continue to fail. We got to turn this around. Thank you.
Yes.
Does she's going to change in the Supreme Court have a lot to do with getting this into happen?
I can't really say that it does. You know, we made the decision to go forward with this lawsuit now, and, you know, we filed it.
But did you feel any pressure to get it done now, because if you wait too long, you'll have a whole different court to deal with?
No, we have a different court today than we had for Bush v. Holmes, and the Bush v. Holmes court was certainly well tuned in and well capable of making a decision on the constitutional issues. So, no, that was not part of the equation.
And while the Reverend comes up, I just want everybody to know that our members that we represent, that work in our public schools, are angry. They're angry that this is continuing to happen. And so they are ready, and they are up for the challenge, and they are up for the fight. So when I said we are speaking on behalf of 140,000 members, I mean we are speaking on behalf of 140,000 members.
At Americans United for Separation of Church and State, we deal with that issue, though it's not truly related. And we always come back to the question of perceived valuation. To the consumer, public schools are free and therefore not worth very much or not very effective, while the schools funded through the corporate tax scholarship program have fancy tuitions that in the end you and I are paying for. And so we attach a great value to them and little value to the public schools. But in my community in Flagler County, the public schools always and consistently score better than the neighboring private schools. Despite the issue of dumping, do not forget that difficult and challenging students can be tossed out by the private schools who receive funds through the SFO, but the public schools must take them. And they do, and they still excel, even though their perceived valuation, that they're free, that they can't be very good, they are in fact quite good and quite excellent.
There's no intention to do anything with the McKay scholarships, for example, though some of the same funding scheme occurs there, correct?
This lawsuit does not address the McKay Scholarship Program. There are differences, frankly, with you know, education of children who might not otherwise be able to receive the services that they need in a public school that the courts have said over the years. In some instances, private funding can be used to provide that education that the child is entitled to if, in fact, the public school can't serve them. So this is not aimed at the McKay program, and we don't have any plan at this time to bring any kind of litigation against the McKay program.
All right, thanks very much for coming out, and everybody will be available to